Welcome to this episode of the Continue Change podcast. Today we have a wonderful guest with us here named Todd. Todd, tell us about yourself and tell us about the wonderful organization that you are with.
All right. Well, I'm excited to be here. I am the development director for Kingdom Causes Bellflower. From a functional standpoint, we're a homeless services provider. We have a housing team that provides case management and rental assistance and housing navigation in a complex market of Southern California. We also have a social enterprise called Good Soil Industries, which is a second chance jobs program. Facility for families, particularly homeless families that are looking to transition off the streets and into more stable permanent housing. So those are our functional areas. Philosophically, we see ourselves as a catalyst. We really want community development to be a shared experience. And so we work with a lot of churches and small businesses and other nonprofits and city leaders and try to network collaborative solutions. We've been around for about 20 years. And so we're not necessarily a one-stop shop. We don't necessarily do one thing because community development evolves a little bit.
Yeah. So community development is not just one thing. So are there some parallels then between your model and like an asset-based community development model?
Yes, absolutely. That is language that we use around the office. It's always a little bit of I won't say it's a tension, but it's a matter of trying to figure out the best balance between being a direct services provider and enlisting the community, because there are functions that really require experienced professionals. We have social workers on staff who go out and do outreach, who do assessments, but then we also have volunteers that come in and we train them and equip them and get them ready to do work. But that's always a hard thing because ideally, you share all the work. You essentially work your way out of a job because the whole community is getting involved, but that takes a lot of maintenance and training and sort of orienting people to the right position. So that's something it's an ongoing conversation about how to say how much we do in-house versus trying to get the community involved.
Right. Where does your work start and where does it stop is a changing target, I'm sure. So, and you're doing fundraising. How long have you been doing that for, and what has the last few years looked like so that we can better understand what the last 3 or 4 months has looked like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been in this position with the organization for the last 4 years. Prior to that, I was actually on the board of directors in a volunteer capacity. And so I sort of got my start in grant writing while I was on the board. It just became something that I was interested in. I worked with the current executive director on that, and then eventually retired from the board and transitioned into a staff position. In a lot of ways, I'm self-taught. I think a lot of grant writers are self-taught. And so the organization hasn't had a development officer for its entire history. It's one of those positions where small nonprofits would love to have, operations people and HR and finance and legal expertise and fundraising and lots of things. And you say, well, that'd be great if we could have that, but we don't have the funding for that.
Yeah. So, if only we had the money, we would hire all of those people, right?
Exactly. So my job has encompassed grant writing, coordinating a couple fundraisers a year, and then donor relations. So building relationships with local folks who have a heart for what we're doing, and then working on various logistical aspects of fundraising. So maintaining a database, mailings, correct records, that sort of thing. So my goal over the last few years is to sort of develop a regular regimen of grant applications. Grant writing is something that is not always the most popular task for people. It can be a little dry. It can be a little bit.
It doesn't get the glory. It doesn't get the glory.
It does not. It does not. Everyone sort of says, "Oh yeah, grant writing, very important, very important," but people don't necessarily want to do it. So obviously, in the last few months, we've had to pivot a little bit in terms of fundraisers, how much we're interacting with the people in the community, how much we're getting out in the community, that sort of thing. And so we've had to rethink a little bit what fundraising look like and what donor relations looks like.
Yeah, which is the thing, of course, that we're all nonprofits are kind of trying to reinvent right now. And yet on the flip side, or rather interestingly enough, your model is more important arguably than ever before, because you're trying to empower a community that is going through some real serious change that's resulting in a myriad, I'm sure, of struggles. What has that shift looked like for you? Are you doing like the virtual thing? I think you had mentioned that virtual wasn't working for you. I'd be so curious to learn more about that.
Yeah, so it's a complicated question because, okay, so backing up, we had a spring fundraiser, which was going to be an annual dinner. Lots of nonprofits do a dinner. There's a program, there's an ask. We've done that for several years. It's actually a great event. We enjoy it, and we call it a celebration dinner, even though everybody knows it's a fundraiser. But we'll bring people back that were clients of ours or people that went through various programs. We'll highlight some successes. We'll be honest about some challenges that we're having, and then people tend to contribute. So obviously, we got to March and we said, you know what, our April fundraiser is not going to happen. And so we canceled the dinner, and in its place, we just kind of did your standard mailing. We just wrote a letter and said, here's where we are. It's in COVID. You all know this. We didn't spend a lot of energy focusing on COVID itself.
Right. Everyone knows.
Everybody knows.
These are trying times.
Right. But I think
as my cat climbs up my shoulder, right?
Hey, that's what makes it real, right? This is a conversation. So we didn't focus a lot on COVID, but what we did emphasize in our letter is people had challenges before because we work with homelessness, because we work with people that are at risk. There were people that were out of work before. There were people struggling with housing before. COVID has only emphasized that. So we actually got a pretty good response from this letter, not necessarily as much as we would have raised with the dinner. I think one of the complicated questions for a fundraiser sometimes is to say, what is it that's going to resonate with people? Because I know as a fundraiser, and we have this discussion in the office, I've given to nonprofits at different places, throughout my life. So I get stuff in the mail. I don't read all the letters. I'm very sorry, all the all the nonprofits. I know, I'm sorry. I feel bad.
Terrible news.
I know it is.
Terrible news.
But they know this. I don't read all the letters, but I'm sure they're all well written. I'm sure they all tell a good story. I'm sure they all highlight a need. And then I make certain choices based on where I am and what I'm prioritizing.
Yeah. Relationships, values, priorities. Yeah.
I think one of the things that, and you asked about the virtual, and it's interesting because as a development person, I'm on a lot of mailing lists, and you get a lot of newsletters, and you get sent a lot of links to, here's a way to set up a virtual fundraiser. Here's how to do a virtual this, virtual that. I think for us, one of the things that I was sort of struck by was a article that I read about identity, and basically saying, if online fundraising is part of your regular thing, then go for it. It might be a good fit for you to do this right now. If you're trying to do this on the fly, if you don't really know what you're doing, if an online presence is not something that is your forte, then your constituency may be a little confused. Yeah. Because you have to sort of step back and say, why does somebody come to a fundraiser? Why do they come to a fundraising dinner?
Hmm.
Ideally, you would hope that it would be because they love the organization. In a lot of ways, it is. But sometimes it's also about, hey, sure, I'll go to a fundraiser. Maybe there's going to be some people there that I know. I don't have to cook. The food might be decent.
Some delicious steak, perhaps. Yep.
Yeah. Depending on whether it's, some fundraisers have music, they have speakers, they have comedians. People might go, sure, that sounds good. And sure, I'll throw a couple bucks in the pot and we'll go from there. So I think what we looked at was saying, what is it that would really sort of capture people? And do we want to spend the hours developing an event? Because we always have these questions, and we discuss this, I discuss this amongst my colleagues, is when you talk about fundraising, you have to always look at the investment. How many hours of staff time are going to go into putting this event on?
Which we often forget to look at, don't we? We often forget to think about the hours. Yeah. Everything's in-kind, but there's time.
Right. Yeah. Is there an overhead associated with that? And particularly right now, and I think when I look back on this, I say people are really experiencing sort of online fatigue in a lot of ways. You've got a lot of Zoom and Microsoft Teams and that sort of thing. Kids are going to school online. People are working from home, doing virtual meetings.
People are doing podcasts now.
They're doing podcasts now. Am I going to say to somebody, hey, why don't you get online again? Come to our thing. And so for us, I think we sort of said, this isn't necessarily the best fit. Now, was that the right decision? We'll find out in the long term. But ultimately, when you look at a lot of these fundraisers, there's some cool ideas. There's some fun ideas. But you also have to say, look, it's supposed to raise money.
Yeah.
Am I going to, and there's a lot of competition out there. So if you go on social media, it's really easy to create a little fundraiser. Hey, I'm raising money. I don't know if you're on Facebook, but I'm on Facebook and I'll see this all the time. People saying, hey, it's my birthday. I'm raising money for this cause. Right there. There's your little fundraiser. And so some of that gets lost in all of kind of the sea of online presence. And in a lot of ways, at least what we've found is that for us, social media isn't always the best medium for fundraising because oftentimes people are on there for entertainment. I can post a picture of, something funny and I'll get a bunch of likes, but if I post a link to a fundraiser, they won't get as much traffic.
Crickets. And Todd, I love that so much because as a digital marketer, I find myself feeling challenged by the fact that although we can do something, that doesn't always mean that we should do something. So I'm so intrigued that you looked at your audience and you said, hey, this experience might not create value for them, or this experience might not be profitable, which is the ROI that you need as a fundraiser for the organization. It seems like there's almost a choir now singing, do it virtual. And here you are saying it didn't seem like the right idea. That takes a certain amount of courage, I think.
Well, and it's not like we don't have an online presence. We have someone in the office that maintains a Instagram account, and we put pictures out of what's going on with us, and we send out emails to people, and we have a Facebook page. And so those things are there. We do recognize that a part of our constituency is online, and we do have to continue to be a presence. And it is an easy way to reach people sometimes. You put a picture out and say, here's what's going on with us right now. We just want to give you an update. I think for us, it comes down to a question of, are we actually going to reach people? Is it going to actually translate to involvement? And it's hard. It's hard these days, particularly with, you get emails all the time, and how many of them either go unread or just get archived or deleted. I certainly read the ones that are important to me, but then there is also the still we're still, as humans, we're tactile, and so
Mhm.
getting something in the mail or a postcard or something like that we can put on the fridge or put on
Yeah,
our
we're still
stack.
using sticky notes, right? There's
We are
still
still using sticky
value in
notes.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and part of it too is when you think about your constituency, what's the age group of your constituency? What's the demographic? Are the people that are giving to you younger or older? Who are you trying to reach? There's lots of
Know
cool
your
tools
audience.
out there. Yeah. So
Yeah.
there's lots of cool tools out there, and we look at tools all the time. Should we try to collect money through a certain app or medium or something? Should we try to connect with this particular type of social media? We may be missing out on certain opportunities because we don't have a presence in certain things. But again, it usually comes back to, return on investment. If I have 8 different ways for you to donate, is that going to just create kind of a confusing array of ways to input into our organization versus saying, hey, we got a link and we got a PayPal account, and mostly we're going to go with that.
Yeah.
And it will work.
Yeah.
So.
I like that you've considered your target audience, because I think sometimes it's easy to forget to consider the target audience and just to get swept up in the we can, and not to ask the should we question. So you've then not had some of these big events, which means that you're perhaps a little bit more reliant on foundations and private money. What's the atmosphere out there? Is it easy to raise money if you're doing something that directly affects the community right now, or is it just as hard as always?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the complicated answer is it's hard to know for sure.
Yeah.
I have been able to, the one thing that I've found that I've been very appreciative of is that you can actually connect with foundation professionals. You can't call all of them. Some of them say, thank you for your application. We're not going to fund it at this point. Please do not call us and try to
please leave us alone.
Right. I always sort of joke to people that the rejection letters for grants look very similar to the rejection letters you get or emails when you apply for a job.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
You look amazing. Keep doing what you're doing. But
you're so great.
So did 1,000 other people, and no money for you. You can apply again in 12 months. But in talking to a couple foundations, I've gotten a little bit of a vibe that foundations and some corporate groups are a little bit more hesitant to. Now you've got two camps. I should back up.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as COVID happened, there were a couple of companies that just threw out grants right off the bat.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, we know there's a need. We know there's an immediate need. Here's a grant, and people just flocked to them.
Yeah, especially like the economic development nonprofit.
Sure,
yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Other groups have been a little bit more hesitant to sort of say, we're a little bit leery about where we're going, because ultimately in any circumstances, COVID or not, as a nonprofit, I have to convince a foundation I'm going to be here next year.
Right.
You are going to invest in me, and you're going to make a good investment because we're going to stick around for a while. Now, I can't promise anything, but ultimately, when you fill out an application, you fill out all the windows on the web page, they will ask you those types of questions about sustainability. How do you know that this is going to keep you going? Because typically foundations are willing to support things, but they don't necessarily want to be your lifeline forever. They don't want to give too much money. They don't want to say, sure, I'll fund your entire organization. Sometimes they'll say, we're going to keep it under a certain percentage. And they also sometimes say, this is going to be a 1-year deal.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to have to figure out something else.
Right. So don't open up a new building that you don't have the capacity.
You can't pay the maintenance for it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I've talked to a couple of them, and I think even from a fiscal standpoint, foundations, particularly when the stock market has sort of stabilized for now, whatever that means. But particularly March, April, May, when the stock market was very much on a roller coaster, I did talk to one foundation that said, look, part of our money is tied up in investments.
Yeah.
And so
you're doing as you are you have a fiscal responsibility to invest that money and get the most out of it, but now
Sure.
You're also being impacted by the stock market.
Right. So if you're a foundation, you have a fund, much like I think there's parallels to say a 401k.
Mm-hmm.
You can if you start a 401k, particularly when you're younger, you can say, look, the stock market's going to go up and down for a number of years, but I can ride it out because I've got a long-term plan. A foundation says, hey, we're not going anywhere, so we can ride out up and down. But
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't necessarily mean that when we're in a trough, we want to be giving away a bunch of money.
Right. We still got to hedge our cash position and be safe. Yep.
So for us, we are a combination of private donations, grants, and then also some government funding through contracts, which renews from year to year. So for now, there's a level of stability, but that's always kind of up for grabs.
Always up in the air.
And because we're looking at potentially county, state, and federal drops in revenue due to COVID, due to all that, without getting into the politics, we all sort of understand.
Yeah.
We're not necessarily bringing the government's not bringing a lot of cash right now.
Yeah.
There could be some cuts
goes
in
down,
that.
so does funding. Yeah.
So there's going to be some cuts in that probably going forward, and that's the business. That's the nature of what we do, and you can worry about that. You can be vigilant about that. But when you get into this type of work, then that just kind of goes with the territory. And I love my job. It's super unstable sometimes because of that, but I love the work that we do. And so it makes it worth it, and it makes it easier to sell because I believe in what we're doing.
Yeah. Well, it's always easier to sell a dessert that you also like to eat. And you guys are making a measurable impact on the community with the models that you're using. What advice do you have as someone else in your position is listening to this, watching this, and thinking, wow, Todd seems like a smart guy. I wish I could ask him what to do. What would you tell him?
Well, I think part of it goes back to your identity. You have to sort of know what you are and why you exist. And I think there's great value in languaging, coming up with sort of your core statements. And some of that is done in strategic planning, and depending on whether you have a board or, more board driven or staff driven. I have a library of content that I've written about our organization, about different programs, and it gets tweaked all the time. I'll reread a paragraph and I'll sort of go, you know what, I'm going to rewrite this a little bit, because ultimately when you're a fundraiser, you'll get asked that question all the time. What do you do? What's your organization about? And you don't necessarily have an hour to explain it. The elevator pitch is very real. It's
got to be fast. Yeah. Even though we're not in elevators right now, right?
That's right. Nobody's in elevators, at least maybe by themselves. So I think too, there's a measure of patience that goes with fundraising, particularly if you get into grant writing. I crank out a lot of grant applications, and you gotta just stick with it, because you're gonna get a lot of rejections, and it's not necessarily about you. It's a hard field. And I talk to people sometimes where they say, yeah, we would love to fund all these organizations. There's so many people out there. It's like anything else, giving people jobs, and there's only so many resources. And so you have to really believe in what you're doing, because you're going to get a lot of people telling you no. It sounds really cool. Hey, we're going to write a grant, and then we're just going to get a big chunk of money. And maybe you will.
Maybe. Or you'll get entirely rejected.
Right. And particularly, I think our organization's been around for 20 years. I've been told by various people, and I don't know if this is actually substantiated, but a new nonprofit in the first few years is not necessarily going to get a lot of grant funding, because you don't have a track record. They're
Proof of concept is lacking. Yeah.
Yeah, you could fold. But I think the other piece too is it is to a certain extent about relationships, because I teach students, and I'll tell them, hey, some of the jobs you're going to get in life are going to be because you know people. Yes, education is very important. Work experience is very important. Write a good resume. Make sure there's no typos. Send it in. But you're going to make some career connections just through those relationships. And grants are kind of the same way. I don't necessarily recommend this as a strategy. This might be seen as stalking, but I had applied to a foundation a couple of times, got rejected, and said, I'm going to try to find somebody. So I went on LinkedIn, I did some digging, I found a person that appeared to work for this foundation, and I sent them a message, and I just said, hey, could you give me some thoughts?
I love the sleuthing. I love it.
Yeah, no, not why didn't you give us money because we're awesome.
Yeah,
I just said,
hey, I'm trying to get better at this. What do I need to know?
If I apply in the future, what might you suggest? Are we a good fit, or are we just not the type of organization that you are interested in? And I got a response, which turned into a phone call, which turned into the application the following year, which turned into us getting funding because we built that relationship.
Wow.
Now that's not a guarantee, because I've tried that technique a couple other times where I sent somebody a message and no response. They either didn't get the message, or they look at this and say, I'm not going to take the time to talk to this person. We have a website and you may apply just like everybody else, and there is no cutting ahead of people, and that's fine.
Yeah.
I always have to say to people, you're asking people to just give you money.
Yeah.
Somebody worked hard and earned this money, and they put it in a fund, and now they're just giving it away. You can't be upset when they don't give it to you. You can't feel resentful. They're giving out of the generosity of their spirits, and that's awesome, and that's how you exist. So don't take it for granted. Be grateful for the opportunities. Now, sure, it's still disappointing. If I spend hours and hours and hours on an application, I feel really good about it. I send it off. I get a letter a week later. Sure, absolutely.
Still hurts.
You just go, oh man, I felt good about that one. So
nobody wants a rejection call or email.
Yeah, there's always a very cautious optimism to fundraising, particularly grant writing. You have to say, I feel good about what we do. I feel good about what I've written. But ultimately, you could get rejected. And it's like getting broke. It's the old, now is you getting broken up with. They say, it's not you.
It's not me, it's you.
Yeah. So.
I think those are really practical tips. I love the applicable examples too. And if anybody succeeds with this LinkedIn approach, I think they're going to owe you some credit and accolades, to be sure. So are there any shameless plugs that you want to share before this comes to an end today? Anywhere we should go to find you, and anything we should do once we get there?
I would say you can go to our website, it's kcbellflower.org, and just poke around. Obviously as a fundraiser, I could say give, but I'm not going to necessarily.
Yes.
I want you to give. I think the thing that, ultimately I will say to people, if someone wants to give me a check for our organization, I will take it.
Absolutely.
ultimately, I want them to give because they believe in what we're doing. Now, do I know that people out in the world give because of tax credits and, you know, getting their name on things and stuff like that? Sure. I can validate that. I can honor that. But ultimately, I will always ask people whether they want to know about what we do, if there's a way that they can get involved, even if it's in a small way. And so, yeah.
I love that. Yeah. So a hard ask and a soft ask all at once. Well, I appreciate so much that you stopped by the podcast today and that you took the time to chat. Todd, it's not me, it's you. I think we're gonna wrap it up at that. Thanks so much, Todd.
My pleasure.